Tariffs, or the import tax, are the taxes put forward by the government on other countries in order to control the trade. It is an economic tool that is used to control the flow of incoming goods and services from other countries. There are generally two types of tariffs: specified tariffs and ad valorem tariffs. Tariffs are usually used to encourage local production and to reduce trade imbalance or deficit. In this video, we are going to mention and discuss about a tariff act during the Great Depression period and its impact on global trade. And so, let's start with the video. The Roaring Twenties was a period during the 1920s when the West saw significant economic growth after the end of First World War. This period witnessed rapid industrial growth in sectors like automobiles, electrical appliances, and aviation. There was an increased growth in consumer demand, and the air was filled with great economic optimism. Witnessing this economic optimism, people began to invest their money heavily on the stock market, and soon the market was full of speculations. In the late October of the year 1929, the stock market crashed. Many people panicked and soon began to sell their holdings, but to no avail. The worst of all was yet to unfold. Many banks around the globe witnessed bank run. A bank run is a situation wherein account holders try to withdraw all of their savings from the bank. In the US, Bank of United States witnessed a bank run situation in its Bronx branch. In Germany, the Reich Bank suffered heavy losses following the collapse of Credit Anstalt, a major Austrian bank in Vienna. All of this financial turmoil led to loss of confidence in the market and an increase in unemployment rate. This in turn led to Great Depression, a period of slowed economic growth. During the early period, the government tried to intervene by implementing protectionist policies so as to boost the local economy. One such policy was the introduction of Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was sponsored by Senator Reed Smoot and Representative Willis C. Hawley. This act was signed by then US President Herbert Hoover on June 17, 1930. The act saw an increase in tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods. Prior to implementing this act, there was another tariff act. It was the Fordney-McCumber Act. This act saw an average import tax increase to 40%, which prompted the European nations to raise their own tariffs against the US as a form of retaliation. Throughout most of the 1920s, as the European farmers recovered from the impact of First World War, there was an intense competition in American agriculture, and the prices declined due to overproduction. This led the US agricultural interest to lobby the federal government for protection against agriculture imports. The motive behind implementing the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was for the US to protect its jobs and farmers from foreign competition. In fact, during the 1928 United States presidential elections, one of Hoover's promises was to help farmers by raising tariffs on agricultural goods. As President Hoover took the office, lobbyists from other economic sectors started to encourage him to support broader increase in tariffs. This led to recommendation of tariffs on 890 different items, which effectively raised the tariffs by 20% on average. Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was a protectionist policy. A protectionist policy, or simply protectionism, is an economic policy of restricting imports from other countries by implementing tariffs, import quotas, and other forms of government regulation. Supporters of protectionism argue that it boosts the economy by shielding the producers, businesses, and the workers from foreign competition, while the opposers argue that protectionism affects trade and most of its cost is borne by the consumer. When this act was passed to the House, it was met with strong opposition. On May 1930, about 1,028 economists in the US signed a petition asking President Hoover to veto the legislation. Famous industrialists like Henry Ford also tried to oppose the bill, calling it an economic stupidity. Despite the opposition, the act was eventually signed by the president. Immediately after this act was signed, many countries tried to retaliate by issuing their own sets of tariffs on American exports. Exports to countries that protested the act fell to 18%, and 31% for countries that retaliated against the act. Canada, one of the most loyal trading partners, retaliated by imposing new tariffs on 16 products, which accounted for 30% of US export to the country. Other countries that retaliated were Cuba, Mexico, France, Italy, Spain, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, and Switzerland. The tariff also affected the global trade. US import declined to 66% from $4.4 billion in 1929 to $1.5 billion in 1933, and the exports decreased 61% from $5.4 billion to $2.1 billion. Imports from Europe declined from $1.3 billion in 1929 to $390 million in 1932. Similarly, US exports to Europe fell from $2.3 billion in 1929 to $784 million in 1932. Overall, tariffs impacted the global trade, and it decreased it by almost 66% from 1929 and 1934. Unemployment rate was 8% in 1930. After the Tariff Act was introduced, the rate jumped from 16% in 1931 and 25% in 1932 to 1933. The Tariff Act did impact the global economy, but had it not been passed, the depression still would have occurred, but perhaps with less severity. Following the impacts of the Tariff Act, the newly elected President Franklin D. Roosevelt passed the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act in 1934. This act ensured that the President can negotiate the tariff reductions on a bilateral basis. In 1944, Bretton Woods system was established. This was a money management system wherein countries were required to guarantee their currency's convertibility into US dollars to within 1% of fixed parity rates. If needed, dollars could be converted to gold bullion at a rate of 35 US dollars per troy ounce of fine gold. This system mainly focused on foreign exchanges and not on tariffs. Therefore, President Harry S. Truman led a proposal for formation of International Trade Organization in 1945. The International Trade Organization, or the ITO, failed due to lack of approval by the US Congress. Meanwhile, most of the global trade talks and negotiations were done through the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, or the GATT. This agreement was the precursor to the World Trade Organization, which was established in the year 1995. To conclude, protectionist policies such as the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act did not initially cause the Depression, but its implementation had made things more difficult. Overall, tariffs are an economic tool which is used by the importer to restrict foreign goods. This is done so as to limit competition, reduce consumption of foreign goods, and to raise government revenue. Tariffs have wider effect on global economy. Countries that initiate tariffs risk themselves getting involved into trade wars where other countries impose tariffs as a form of retaliation. With that being said, what is your view on tariffs? Feel free to share your thoughts. Until then, see you in the next video.